Hey everyone, Joe here. In this episode, I got the amazing opportunity to sit down and chat with Patrick Phats Kennedy, an Air Force officer, fighter pilot, and currently the commander of the Warhawks, the 480th Fighter Squadron at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany. During our discussion, we talked about the life of a fighter pilot, various leadership principles, and much, much more. Enjoy.
Life, learning, leadership, the Llama Lounge.
Yo, welcome back to the Llama Lounge, a dialogue on all things life, learning, and leadership. This is Joe Bogdan. I have with me an amazing guest on the podcast. He is the commander of the 480th Fighter Squadron, the Warhawks at Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany. An amazing human being, Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Phats Kennedy. How's it going, sir?
Oh, it's going good, Chief. First off, I want to thank you for having me on and tell you how proud I am of you for starting the Llama Leadership Series. I mean, it's awesome, and it's reaching so many people. And what's really fantastic about it is just true mentorship, right? It's just people that have been there, done that, and you're sharing your story with other people, and you're bringing out new perspectives. And I can't be more proud of you. So thanks for doing that.
Oh, thank you, sir. That means so much. And I know that the team will really appreciate it. We literally just wanted to talk to people and have bro talk about leadership topics. And even when we started, I'll be honest with you, sir, I thought it didn't dawn upon us that we were going to have such amazing guests on, and then to have those conversations, real conversations. And then it dawned upon maybe a month ago, honestly, we were talking, I said, some of the topics we're talking about on this podcast, Airman so-and-so would have never heard that conversation. Right. I mean, they wouldn't have been able to get that. And I was like, wow, it's kind of cool, because I was thinking if I was Staff Sergeant so-and-so, I would have loved to have heard, a lieutenant colonel and a chief talk about blank, right? I mean, whatever it is, just to get the perspective. And it's really cool. It's made the planet a little bit smaller when it comes to, like you said, mentorship and understanding of things. And I think that's really cool.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, to be a fly on the wall in some of these conversations is now possible, right? I mean, it's the amazingness of technology and people, right?
Yeah.
So it's a great way to leverage Zoom in this case to reach a wider audience. So
yes,
awesome.
Sir. Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. So before we start getting to some of the topics of discussion, as we typically, when we have a guest on, we like to hear their story. We always hear every airman has a story, and and I 100% believe every human being has a story, and we can often glean some wisdom from those stories, whether it's intentional or unintentional. You just kind of hear something, and you might gain something from that story. So we'd love to hear a little bit about you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. So I grew up in Philadelphia. I was raised by a single mother. I have an older brother, 5 years older than me. She was a nurse, and I wanted to fly. I wanted to fly since I was 5 years old, and I used to actually hang out at the Northeast Philadelphia airport and watch planes just take off and land. And it was probably a really easy way for my mom to watch me, because I could just sit there and just watch planes take off and land, take off and land. And that's just something I always wanted to do. And I went through the public school system, and I knew that the only way I was going to be able to fly, just doing my research, was kind of go to the Air Force Academy. I was either going to go to Bucks County Community College or the Air Force Academy. It was either those two. And luckily I got accepted to it. So went to the Air Force Academy. I was on the skydiving team there. So I have a little bit over 1,000 skydives, which is
wow,
pretty cool. And I was able to continue that throughout my career, except now in Europe, I don't do that. So after the academy, I went through the pilot training pipeline, and I wanted to fly fighters. That's what I always wanted to do. And that was my goal, and that was my intent. And I was very focused on that. So then I went to Shepherd for Euro NATO pilot training. and got F-16s out of there. Went to Luke after that for they call it the B course, the basic course. That's where I learned how to fly and employ the F-16 as a weapon system. And then from there, my first assignment was Kunsan. So then that was my first combat fighter squadron, and I was so excited. Like, it was just a dream come true, walking in those doors the first time. And I was like, man, I made it. But then it took me less than an hour to figure out I haven't made it yet. You know, it's a lot of hard work, and it kind of goes to the saying that success is never final.
Right.
Whenever you succeed at one thing, it's just the next challenge, right? And so you have to step to that challenge to then how to learn how to become a fighter pilot and become a wingman, mission ready wingman. And then luckily within that year, I was able to upgrade to a flight lead. And then from there, I went to Aviano after that. So I was pretty stoked. Met my wife actually in Korea. She was teaching over there, and then brought her to Italy with me. Then after Italy, went to Nellis. After Nellis, went to Luke. Then after Luke, went to Maxwell for 2 years. And then after Maxwell, went to Spangdahlem. I've been at Spangdahlem ever since. I've been there for a while, deployed out of there. And yeah, I'm loving living in Germany. And I have 2 kids, a wife, and living the dream, really. I think that going back to, success is never final. Each step of the way, I was given opportunities by leaders to step up and show, am I worthy of this title? And it was always a dream of mine to become a fighter squadron commander. And luckily I achieved that. And now, I'm learning how to command each and every day. I think one thing that life has taught me is that nobody's perfect. And I think that what we have to do is try to learn from our mistakes and always grow, get better. And and that's that. So
that's really cool.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you sharing that. And when you rattled off the bases you've been to, I was like, you haven't been to one bad place. I was like, all those places are sweet gigs. I'm like, I actually want to go to the places that I haven't been to where you said you've been to. That's pretty cool.
I actually, I've been extremely fortunate. I really have. I've been blessed by my assignments because, I loved every single one of them, and the travel opportunities and everything else. But, looking back on all the cool places and travel opportunities, the one thing that kind of sticks with me are the people that I was around in those organizations. And it really ties into camaraderie and friendship. What are the things that I'm going to remember when I'm old, gray, and senile with very few memories left? I think it's those friendships and camaraderie and some of the stories with the other airmen that I share. So,
yeah, I 100% agree. I think back on opportunity, like I would usually try to be transparent, but I don't have like a lot of family, like biological family in the world, but I have a giant family, and and the camaraderie and all the airmen around the world. And I don't even mean that loosely. I mean, like, literally, I feel like if I went any place, you can literally be like, hey, who's over there? Who do I know that's over there? And I could go, let's go do some lunch or something. It's like, there's very few places I feel that I can't do that because, just the time and the amazing people that you meet all the time. So that's very cool.
No, I mean, that's funny. I share that common background where I don't have this huge family, but I feel like I have so many brothers and sisters all over the world.
Yeah.
And I think that is so cool. If I was ever at base X or state X, I always have somebody I could look up. Either they're in active duty or they got out, moved on to other things. But It is
Yeah,
really cool.
it's like you feel bad like if you're only going to be there for a day or two, and you're like, I'm not even gonna have enough time, and you're like 7 people that you would need to meet. You almost gotta like ghost in and out so you don't feel so you don't upset somebody.
I know.
That's happened a couple times. Like,
I know. And now with social media, they found out that you like post a picture of
yeah,
where you've been or something. They're like,
yeah,
oh, you didn't look me up. I was
like
like,
oops.
I only had like 12 hours.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, that's awesome, sir. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. And so a part of that, like, you talked about the persistence and you were focused, right? You knew you wanted to be a fighter pilot, and wow, you're a fighter pilot. I mean, that was really
Yeah.
cool. What kind of challenges though did you face along the way? Because I think a lot of people hear that as like, oh man, I just gotta be focused and I could get whatever I want. I was like, yeah, you gotta be focused, but also persistent, right?
Yeah.
To be able to get through some stuff.
So the other part of the saying, failure is never fatal.
Mhm.
And along the way, I failed so many times. A constant battle. I mean, there was a drive to get to the next step. And I think if I didn't have that drive, it would have been a lot easier just to give up, just to stop. So, you know, just starting in pilot training. At pilot training, you take tests all the time, tests, and you're getting check rides. And one of the most stressful things is you stand up and you talk about emergency procedures of the aircraft, and it goes back to all of your studying and all the books and everything. And then to fail that, you actually stop flying. You can't fly that day if you mess up the emergency procedure of the day. And I remember one time I stood up, and they call them caps, but it was for engine malfunction. And I was young and I was nervous. You stand up and you have, your class and instructors all looking at you. And I said the wrong word. I just mixed it up. And I'll never forget, I couldn't fly that day. They sat me down. They're like, hey, you can't fly. And man, I felt like such a failure. I was like, man, I can't believe I knew what it was. I just misspoke, but it was like, nope, like that is the standard. You didn't meet the standard for today. But I come to realize, like, failure is not fatal. I learned from that and move on. And the next day I have the emergency procedure of the day and I nail it. I study a little bit harder and then I'm flying. And you see that. And then you see other people too fail. And then you have to, you learn how to be a good airman. You help them out. You say, hey, that happened to me. You share your story. You're vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
You share, like, hey, you're not the first person to do this, and you're probably not going to be the last.
Right.
So those are some of the challenges and growing challenges, I would say, that you're humbled immediately. You're humbled by there's always somebody better than you. No matter how good you think you are, there was always somebody better.
Right.
And so you learn real quick to kind of keep your mouth shut and not be super egotistical. And then other challenges as you move along the pipeline has to do with balance. And that's finding a work-life balance, where you're developing yourself, you're developing as an airman in your duties, and then you're also developing yourself as a pilot. And then the older you get, then I start developing myself as a husband, as a father, and also as a friend to many people. So with that just comes, I think, the challenge of time, priorities, and realizing that there's always going to be this next challenge. There's always going to be the next crisis, and you always have to be prepared for that. You can't quickly gain fitness, right? Fitness is going to be a lifelong thing. You can't not be fit one day and the next day you're expected to be fit and then deploy for war. It's these things that you have to constantly develop over time. And those are the it's like life lessons that you gain, and then you realize that you're ready for any challenge, and then you're ready for the next failure, right? You're not afraid to fail. You're not afraid to take risks, but they're calculated risks,
Right.
right? It's understanding how to mitigate the risks, so it's not life we're talking about, except if it's a wartime situation. And then after you mitigate those risks, you step forward and you go forward with confidence, and you have a plan and you execute that plan. And if it doesn't go well, then you debrief it appropriately. And I found that there's one good thing that pilots do very well, and that's harsh debriefs. It's just open and honest debriefs. They don't hold anything back. And we say the ranks off in debriefs, and it's true. You know, if I mess something up, and there's another person that says, "Hey, you messed this up," I expect them to tell me that.
Right.
You know, and it doesn't matter if I outrank them or not. I expect them to hold me accountable.
Right.
And it's that accountability piece that is huge. And I think it's what makes our profession extremely disciplined. And it's not special or unique to just pilots. I mean, that's all across the AFSCs that I found working with everybody. The maintenance has an amazing accountability. When a jet breaks, they have to answer the mail to the wing commander and everybody else. So, yeah, I'm rambling on. So I'll stop there and let it go.
That was awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's no, I mean, you captured a lot of stuff there, and that's what I was thinking, because I really wanted to talk about the challenges, because oftentimes I talked about it in one of my short videos. Is like, you know, us as leaders, you know, we want to inspire people. Right. I mean, it's part of our job really to inspire people. And people think, oh, inspire is some magical thing. It's like, no, it's just showing people that you can get there too. Right. It's showing people a future that they can actually attain also. And a lot of times we do more impressing than inspiring. We show people a future that they can't attain, you know, because everything looks perfect. And I think it's really cool that we get to hear that, you know, it wasn't like I was focused and I was able to become a pilot. You know, the dream did just, you know, I just wasn't destined for this dream. I had to work really hard to get there and surpass some challenges. And I think that's really important for us to share with people that are listening, you know?
No, I agree. That is a really good point. And you know, another thing that kind of sparked there as you were talking is that the older I got, the less afraid I was to say yes to opportunities. You know, I would say that there were some opportunities that I didn't take advantage of, you know, and I wish I did. And this Zoom meeting's a perfect example. You know, when you're like, "Hey, do you want to come talk to me on Zoom?" You know, I was like, "Oh man, I don't like the sound of my voice. No, I don't want to do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I am. I like Chief. You're an inspiring leader, and you know, always be willing to learn. I'm just as much willing to learn from you as I am a lieutenant, a senior airman. We all can teach each other's things, and that is, the older you get, I think the more you see that we're all going through this life together,
right?
And everybody has a story, and everybody has a lesson to be learned, and you know, everybody's valuable.
Yeah, it's funny what you said about the voice thing, because you know, it's not going to be a well-kept secret anymore, but people have told me, it's like, "Oh yeah, I really like your short videos." I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, "Do you know why I did that?" I'll give you, you know, I was like, "Actually, it's because I hate recording myself and I hate my voice. So I wanted to purposely make myself uncomfortable and try it. And somehow it got some, you know, good reviews. So I was like, oh, okay, you know, but I was literally doing it just because I hate doing it. And, you know, I discovered how much I hated it through this, because we're doing more stuff in these, you know, utilizing these platforms. So I was like, I got to make friends with my uncomfortable feeling, you know what I mean? I gotta get past it. So that's why I started doing it. But then somehow it got some, you know, decent reviews on some of those. So it's pretty cool.
No, that's awesome. That, you know, it reminds me of that book, The Obstacle is the Way. You know, even though it's going to be a challenge, you step up to it. You step out of your comfort zone, because you know that the obstacle is the way. Just keep moving towards that.
That is my favorite book, I think. I mean, I'm looking back at it, and I have so many favorite books, but I could honestly say that book has the most. I highlighted more. I think the only other book I've highlighted as much or wrote in was our PDG when I was studying for promotion. I mean, like that book I highlight nonstop. I was like, oh, that's a gem. That's a gem. And it's not even that big of a book. And it's like mostly highlighted in there. So phenomenal book. And I'm a huge Stoicism fan. So
me too. I think we share that with each other, with Ego as the Enemy and Obstacles the Way by Ryan Holiday. The cool thing about that book is that you start looking at adversity differently.
Mm-hmm.
Adversity isn't a chance to fold up and just consider the failure and the negative aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's to turn it around. How can I use this as a learning point? How can I use this to make myself better, my team better, my organization better? Because life is not going to stop throwing curveballs. Right. That it's the one constant is that life is going to be challenging. It's not going to be easy. So the best thing you can do is face that adversity and understand that it's happening to make you better.
Yeah.
And you become a better leader. And then next thing you know, the adversity doesn't seem so difficult anymore, even though
it looked terrible at the beginning when you looked at it, right? So yesterday, I know, no joke, I think studying Stoicism and understanding that, and yesterday I was staring out the window in the morning before PT, like going for a run, and I looked out the window and it looked like just hurricane winds outside. I mean, I'm being very hyperbolic right now, but it was rough because Northern California can get really windy, and that's one of the reasons why they built the base here for the heavies. They purposely did that because of the wind. And I'm sitting there looking out there, and I'm just like, I don't want to go run right now. I really don't want to run right now. This looks terrible, and I'm sitting there like 15 straight minutes just staring out the window, finding reasons why not to do it. And I was like, all right, it's time to go. So I strapped on my weight vest and just went out for the run, and I felt so much better. But I really did not want to go do that. But I think the perspectives of, that's the obstacle is the way. Go do something hard today. Do something challenging, it'll make you better. At minimum condition you to be able to experience tougher things. There's so many good things that come from that. And Stoicism I love because it not only talks about, controlling what you can, putting your energy into the things that you have most control and influence over. But also there's virtue with it, understanding that there's something out there bigger than you that you can serve. And there's so many other facets of Stoicism that I really appreciate, but that's some very cool stuff.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah. So I wanted to get into this thing because, I was like, man, it's gonna be awesome. I'm going to talk to an F-16 fighter pilot. And I think honestly, a lot of our members are Air Force members, and people who are listening to this that aren't probably think all of us in the Air Force know a lot about being a pilot, which is very untrue, right? I have been in the Air Force almost 20 years now. I'm at 19, and I know jack about fighter pilots. Like what you do, and I kind of want to kind of call this the anatomy of a fighter pilot. What your experiences are. What does the timeline of a pilot's career kind of go through? And I wanted to start off with call signs. How did fighter pilots get call signs, and how did you get yours?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So my call sign's Phats, and it's spelled Phats. And, Phats, when you say it, it should start with an F. But then if you look at the Phantom, it doesn't start with an F. It starts with a PH. So, and then it was also the time, what was in vogue at the time, pretty hot and tempting, even though that's not what my call sign stands for. So that was the Phats ended up being the call sign. Stands for Party's Hard at Seoul. And it just so happens, good story, as a lieutenant, we used to go up to Seoul, and we called something the money night is what we called it. And we used to go up there and wear fancy clothes. By fancy, we put on ties. And, we used to go to a restaurant, make reservations, and it was just a good time to get the whole squadron out and get off base from Kunsan. So we'd go up there, and for whatever reason, it stuck that that I partied hard at Seoul. So that was the call sign, and that I've had now for since 2006. So a
Wow.
little bit of time.
Yeah, that's funny. And you talk about the suits and stuff. So I was in or the ties. When I was in Osan, we just started doing this thing called Suits on the Sed, and Sed is Songtan Entertainment District, which is right outside the gate.
Yeah.
So we would just pick a random day. It could be Tuesday, whatever day we're gonna go out and have some drinks, and all of us would just get dressed, and people were like, "What are you guys dressed for?" It was like, it's Suits on the Sed day, it was just great times, and it just reminded me of that. That was awesome that you guys did that.
Yeah, it's nice. It just reminds me of just times in the past, friendship, camaraderie, things like that, and it's pretty cool. We had it reminds me of my very first squadron. I was in the 35th Fighter Squadron at Kunsan, and I was there at one time. I think there was 14 other lieutenants there with me, so a lot of lieutenants in a squadron, unheard of.
Right.
Even though we're getting back there now, but it's those tight relationships. 8 of those lieutenants came to my wedding. It's
Wow.
It's those friendships and those bonds that you build. So
yeah, that is something unique to what we do. Just because I was thinking, most people, it's just going to sound a little bit morbid, but it doesn't mean to be, but like most people, as you age and you get to a certain age, I think normal civilian society might have like, oh, I'm going to have to go to so-and-so's funeral. Right. I mean, like those are things that you're like, but like for us, it's like, no, it's like, okay, I gotta save up some leave and some money to go to so-and-so's retirement ceremony, and then a change of command or a promotion ceremony, it's like, and because you care about them that much that you're willing to take the trip out there and go do that, and I think that's something very unique to us in the armed services, I think.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. There's always a trip to be had to celebrate somebody,
Right.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book, The Power of Moments?
Oh, no.
So that one's a really good one. It kind of talks about why it's so important to celebrate those things, and I think, as leaders, when it talks about like, it's not just a ceremony or a thing, there's a reason behind it and why we should kind of celebrate those moments and what that does to people and teams and all that stuff. It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
No, that is good. That, you have to be there for those things, right? And I think it's important to go through life with people. So that is good.
Yeah, the money's, to buy the airplane ticket and the time, and those things are well worth the investment. Yeah, for sure.
I think so.
Yeah. So back to the anatomy of a fighter pilot. Okay. So you get your call sign and you start your career. And you said we had a ton of lieutenants. I mean, what's the common thing that you go through on a daily at the beginning of your career as a fighter pilot?
Yeah, cool. So it kind of goes back to my last statement that, within the first hour walking into the squadron or so, I knew that there was a lot of work to be had. So you first show up, everybody graduates from the basic course, which means you know how to do the basic employment of an F-16. But you may not be as proficient or current or have a deep understanding like the other fighter pilots in your organization. So step one, when you first show up, is you have to be a mission ready pilot. So you go through a syllabus. It's somewhere, every base is different, somewhere between, let's call it 10 and 20 sorties. So flights, and then there's some simulators as well that you do. And you start off with basic fighter maneuvers. So that is offense, defense, and we also talk about high aspects, so the two planes flying directly at each other from a neutral position. And you learn how to maneuver your aircraft and then go into a missile or a guns whiz. So that's kind of step one. So you learn the left and right hand of flying an aircraft. And by left hand, right hand, that's the left hand is the throttle, the right hand is the stick. And there's a lot of buttons on there where you're learning, we call it HOTAS. So hands on stick and throttle. is the concept. So you're always looking outside. So you're flying your aircraft in relation to just one other aircraft. And then from there, you go into advanced combat maneuvers. And that is two aircraft fighting one adversary. So now you're starting to work as a team. So you learn how to fly the aircraft by yourself. Obviously, the F-16 is a single seat fighter, but you learn how to fly just your aircraft relation to another, and then you learn how to work as a team to fight one person. And now you maneuver, you force a lethal choice is what we call it. So you're turning, it's a very high G type of maneuvering. And what you're trying to do is make your adversary make a really bad move to where either you can capitalize on it or your flight leader wingman can capitalize on it. So the other guy,
Iceman strategy.
That's right. So then you go through that, and then and that's all within visual range fighting. And then you go from within visual range, and then you go to beyond visual range. So now you're working for tactical intercepts, where now you're starting from a far ways away. So 80, 60 miles-ish away, and now you're maneuvering to within visual range, and you're employing missiles at range. And then you go on, you learn how to drop bombs from there. All the inventory of bombs, the F-16 is often called the jack of all trades, the master of none, because we do all mission sets. So you learn how to drop precision-guided ordnance, general purpose ordnance, 500 pounders, 2,000 pounders. You learn how to shoot the gun. You go on the ranges, you do that. And after you learn the basics of dropping bombs, now you're going into a scenario of close air support, to where you're supporting fighters on the ground. Let's see. Then from there, you learn opposed surface attack. And then what that is now you're just going past the flot FIBA, and now you're on the other side of the flot FIBA, and now you're striking targets, and surface to air missiles are getting shot at you. So you learn how to defend yourself against them. And with all that being said, there's just a myriad of AFIs and tech order guidance that you're trying to learn about the bombs, the targets, how to weaponeer, how to fly your jet properly. And then if you're lucky enough to get into a SEAD unit, and that is suppression of enemy air defense, and that's with the Block 50 mission here at Spangdahlem. The only other U.S. bases that do that for the F-16 Block 50 are Misawa and Shaw. So they're the wild weasel units. And then you learn how to employ the AGM-88, which is a missile that goes after the surface air missiles that are trying to shoot our bombers down. With that, there's a lot of general knowledge to be learned. Intel is a huge part of that. And I think the more you're in the Air Force, you start to learn that just because you're in that jet by yourself doesn't mean there's not a team that got you there.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say that the leaders that kind of put me out there and let me follow a crew chief for a day was just hugely beneficial, because that's the guy fixing the jet all night, getting it ready so I can fly it for an hour and a half. And and that's how I met you, right? So just to brag on you for a little bit, right? So you were in charge of the many airmen, but in particular the airmen that helped the barrier maintenance. And one time a pilot went and successfully took that cable because there was a brake malfunction. And without that cable being ready, she would have not been able to stop that aircraft.
Right.
Which would have caused an ejection and a loss of a $30 million asset. And not even knowing what kind of damage that would have done, not only to the jet, but to other assets on the ground.
Right.
If the jet just continued. So
Mm-hmm.
you see things like that. And kind of, it relates back to my first story as a lieutenant when I failed that emergency procedure of the day,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't say it right
Yeah.
under just the stress of people looking at me. So they try to put you in these stressful situations and simulator training to where you could handle these emergencies in order to safely recover not only yourself, but the assets to keep that combat capability going. I don't know if I exactly answered that question.
No, I think you really did, and I think it really. There's a couple things I wrote down from that I think is important. Like what you talked about, a lot of the technical aspects of the fighter pilot world, right? Like you're going through these things, and it seems like, I mean, it's obvious a lot gets thrown at you that you have to become competent in very quickly, as you're developing and moving on, because a lot of things can go wrong if you're not. And there's a lot of things I want to talk about there. One being standards, right? So you kind of talked about it. You had that you just changed a word around that was incorrect. You knew what the right word was, but
Yeah.
but what if they would have been like, "Oh, you got it. It's cool. Okay, you can fly today." You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah.
and then what you did was they would have lowered the standard, right?
Yeah.
And I bring that up because you talked about the barrier. So that's actually my career field also, because I was superintendent of that flight, but my
Okay.
career field is actually power production. So we work on the aircraft arresting systems,
Mm-hmm.
and we typically rotate into that part of our career field. Other times we're over generators, but very much so, like every standard has to be correct, because if that braking system does not do what it's supposed to do and the aircraft hits it, to the point where we have to report if the aircraft is even a little bit too far off center. We have
Right.
to like send that up, because they're like, well, why was it so far off center? It's like, we saved the aircraft. Yeah, but why was it so far off center? It should have been center, right, of the runway. It should stop them in the middle if you did all your maintenance correctly. So, and I say all that because it's like, I think there are times when, because it's more comfortable, leaders will adjust standards to make
Yeah.
people feel comfortable. And so what are your thoughts on that? And and through your experience, what have you seen happen when we do things like that?
Yeah. No, that's great, actually. Chief, so there's three things that kind of hit me with that, and that's trust, accountability, and standards. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with the first one, is that trust is at the cornerstone of leadership, and it's at the cornerstone of any organization. And I trust that the other people have the same standards and same level of training that I have, because we rely on each other. If I'm not doing my job, the other person that's flying a few miles away from me on my team can die. Um, so it's that trust factor that allows us to succeed as airmen, and then the accountability piece. So I personally have never seen a unit get better when you lower the standards. I've seen units get better by raising the bar and having the team win at something hard.
Right.
But winning at something easy is anybody could do that. But hard, now we're talking challenges. Now we're talking aspirational goals. That's what we're fighting for. And that accountability piece, and I've seen it myself, it is hard to hold people accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And, everybody wants to be the cool guy, right? They don't want to necessarily be the guy that calls somebody else out, because they feel like they're going to get judged.
Mm-hmm.
When, if you do it in a professional manner and you call somebody out and you're respectful when you do it, I think it's just a learning and a leadership opportunity.
Right.
And I think it's hugely important. And that goes for everything, whether it's weapons employment to fitness standards to just dress and appearance. I mean, the spectrum is huge, and it ultimately goes down to discipline. And that's what the military is very good at. We win because our airmen are knowledgeable and they're disciplined and they trust each other. And for those standards, the high standards that we hold, eventually a pilot ends up becoming an instructor pilot. And I think the first time you fail a student, it's actually not the easiest thing to do, because you feel for them, right? You know what it's like to mess something up.
Right.
But then the more you're in the Air Force and the more you see, actually failing them for not meeting the standard is just going to make them better, but it's going to make the whole organization better, because
Right.
a unit is only good as its weakest link.
Right.
So you gotta take care, and you gotta raise the bar high. If you raise the bar high and everybody's meeting it, it's going to raise the whole organization.
Right.
And that's what I've seen. People want to be part of a high performing team that just crushes challenges. So
Right.
I think all those things are important.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think sometimes when we don't want to hold people accountable at the time, it's like we're looking very short-sighted at that moment, how everybody's going to feel at that time, including ourselves, and not realize that, there's a lot more to it. In the long game, we need to hold people accountable at that moment. And it might not feel good right now for anybody involved, the person holding them accountable, as well as the person being held accountable. But long term, it can do a lot. And then, for us too, and what we do, it's some people aren't meant to do it, right? So we just sometimes we have to figure that out too. If you can't meet the standard, some people just aren't. They're amazing people, but maybe this isn't what they should be doing. Is it could impact other people. I think that's really important. And I like what you said about, like, if you hold the standard high, everybody, it could bring everybody up. I think too much we look at, okay, that's the average, and then we focus on the average. Well, what that does is make everybody average, right? Everybody starts to sink to the average, and like, wait, look, no, why don't we examine why these people are performing so well, and that they're not so special that we can't meet that too, right? Like, do a little bit more time in that, So, I think that's those are some really key points. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, if our job is to develop leaders and make the next chief, make the next squadron commander, don't you want those people to be held to the highest standards the entire time? I would say yes.
Yeah, 100%. So, like, transitioning though, real quick, another thought that was just on my mind when you're talking about all the, the competence that you need to gain, getting all this training, and you're getting tested. When do you, as a pilot, start really honing your leadership skills? Because this is just my experience, what I've seen sometimes with young officers. They're growing, and they're really becoming competent in their job. Like an airman would be being competent in their job. And then boom, you're overseeing 400 people. You're like, what the heck just happened? Like, you went from, I do this thing really well, to now I got to, like, oversee, like, all these people, right? Like, when, so I was like, what's the transition look like there? Like, when are you starting to get that development? And I mean, I know you go to SOS and all those different trainings, but it's like, that can't be it, right?
Yeah. So it starts really early on for pilots, as far as leading and set an example. I would say that being a pilot is actually very unique in that in the debrief, when rank is off and we're able to just give open the conversation, you are constantly being critiqued. So, I mean, I'm critiqued the same when I'm flying as a wingman, or if I'm flying number 1 or number 2, or any position that I had. We typically fly in 4-ship formations. No matter what position, I'm actually still critiqued the same way I was critiqued as a lieutenant. So it's this competence that everybody is held to that standard. So I think it takes a leadership skill for a young captain to be able to stand up and actually hold me accountable, just like he would hold everybody else accountable. And it goes into also just everybody in the organization. We're a very officer heavy organization compared to the officer versus enlisted ratio. But it doesn't mean that they're not leading, even though they may not be directly in charge of the SARM, and the SARM is the person that makes sure our guarantees are good, and they do a lot of the paperwork to make sure we can actually fly. Their job is vital to make sure jets get up in the air and pilots can fill them. But how they interact with them, while it could be really easy just to expect them to do their job and almost not interact with them whatsoever. And I see pilots go out of their way to let them know their purpose because they understand of how important they are. And same with the life support equipment. So every time they put on their life support equipment, people have taken hours and hours of work to do that. And just take, for example, an ejection where somebody does have to eject, and that person that packed the parachute saved their life.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of leadership opportunities in that. Now, whether or not people go and grab them, that's a different story.
Right.
But you become first you just work in a shop, typically a training shop or a mobility shop or a weapon shop, scheduling shop. We have a bunch of different shops that run how this fighter squadron is organized. And the first thing you're doing is not only learning how to become a pilot, but you're also learning how to, let's just say, how to become a scheduler. And then after a year, you become an assistant shop chief. And then after another year, become a shop in charge of a shop of about, anywhere from 5 to 10 people in there. Or you can become attached, or you could go work at the wing. And those are great leadership opportunities as well, because then you see a broader picture of everything that is supporting the wing mission.
Right.
And then from there, you become a flight commander as typically a captain, and you're in charge of about 13 pilots or so in your squadron. And then it's interestingly enough, there's a flight commander that is in charge of the training aspects for the wing commander. It gets a good leadership opportunity of how to lead up and down of, hey, how can I look forward and envision what this colonel needs for his training syllabus and the training that he needs to be a pilot. And those are all types of leadership opportunities. One thing that I didn't get until I was a little bit older as an officer was leading the enlisted force. While there's always a leadership opportunity of going out and talking to my crew chief, there's always a leadership opportunity of talking to the maintenance in the back shop, or talking to the LRS people fueling the jets, talking to barrier maintenance, right?
Right.
What I find is there's not necessarily mandated leadership opportunities.
Right.
So I think it takes either a squadron commander or a good superintendent to kind of just open people's view on everything that goes on to actually projecting air power.
Right.
So that is where I find people are really perfecting their leadership skills. And I find that the people that go out of their way and kind of take, I would call them like optional leadership opportunities. They're the ones that really shine. Like, they're the ones that you can tell just really value people and that really care. And those are the people that I find end up becoming your squadron commanders, group commanders, wing commanders.
Right. Right. And that's what I was going to say, is because I think you embody that, and that's why you're in the position you're in. And I know the listeners will be listening, some people will listen. It's like, well, I know a lot of people not doing that. And I was like, well, yeah, there's a lot of people not taking those optional opportunities, like you're saying, because to be clear, like, to be honest, I'm sure a lot of pilots just want to be pilots. They just want to fly, on the burden of extra leadership responsibilities, they just want to fly. So I think that, there's a lot, and there's a lot of people enlisted for. It's like, I just want to do my job. I just want to do this, what burden me with all this other stuff. But so, and I think we need to value those people too, because they really just want to be experts in what they're doing. I think that's really cool.
I agree, Chief. And I think the longer you're in the Air Force, you really start appreciating the amount of time and effort that everybody puts in just so that person could be a pilot, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
and then you see when something goes wrong. So, say that you deploy someplace and for whatever reason, the logistics doesn't work out and equipment doesn't show up on time.
Yeah.
Then you realize how important and how like
Right.
critical every little piece is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You're
and
just you're speaking to a support guy, so yeah, you're
yeah.
speaking our language. You're like, oh, we're so appreciative that because it's like everybody thinks the power just stays on by itself,
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Imagine the lights go out. Imagine the power goes out.
Yeah.
We are so
Yeah.
like we're just out to lunch. I was just walking around with somebody, and we're just talking about generators,
Hmm.
and backup power,
Yep.
and how important and how critical
Right.
it is to make sure all that stuff is functioning.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's funny that because a lot of people, and I'm not even sure if you're tracking, like the same job that's doing the backup generator, the same guy who's doing your aircraft arresting systems, right? So
yeah,
yeah, so as a power pro that's the career field that does both. So,
yeah.
and that's the career field I grew up in. And literally, I one time, and this is just totally off topic, but one time I had a buddy of mine, I was in charge and I told him, I was like, hey, you guys got to go. There was a problem with a installed generator.
Hmm.
It was so cold in Korea and there was water in the fuel line that it froze. So then the generator just wouldn't work. So they're like, hey, we just called them and told them that, if they lose power, give us a call and we'll take a mobile unit over there. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, we'll just take it over. I was like, how about you take the mobile unit over there now? That way, when they call, you can just turn it on, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, it's like 8 degrees outside. And I'm like, got it. But, and they're like, you want us to do all that just for a what if? And I was like, our entire job is what if we do backup
Yeah.
power systems and a rusting system. That's really, I was like, yeah, I want you to go over there and take a generator. But yeah, like you said, the importance of that. And then, yeah, they didn't have a power outage that night.
Yeah.
It wasn't used, but I was like, but still, that's not the point.
Yeah. And that is where, when there's a lot of, and I just call them like thankless jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we need to turn our mindset around a little bit where they're thankless jobs, because if everything works,
Mm-hmm.
you don't even know who to thank. It's just like, yeah, that's just stuff worked.
Right.
Right. And the next thing you know, that somebody's taking a cable and saving their life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's there when you need it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of thinking that drives the purpose of why people do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to show somebody what you're doing is so vital to the fighter wing mission, and thanking them. Yeah, you can't put a price on that. It's motivation. It's what keeps people in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
It is showing them their why and defining the value that they bring to the organization, and having a culture an environment that actually constantly looks and says, my job is bigger than me.
Mm-hmm.
A crew chief just doesn't turn wrenches. A crew chief makes sure that jet is ready to be employed at a moment's notice. And the trust that is associated with that is amazing. And I think that's what makes the U.S. Air Force great.
Yeah.
And it's just being able to recognize that.
Yeah. You know what I really appreciated a little bit about what you even talked about a moment ago when you're the leadership opportunities, within the fighter squadron. One thing that I wrote down when you were talking about, I was like, okay, today you're going to be the wingman. Later, the next time you get to be the lead, And that one just kind of blew my mind, because I'm like, that is such a cool model, because I think we talk about character. I think that we lack some of those forced positions of humility, almost like, and because I always tell my team, and like, I'm looking for people of character to recognize, not just people who look good on pieces of paper. Me and my buddy Caleb, we were talking about paper tigers. You look really good on paper, but what are you actually doing? And I think it's important that we recognize that people who are willing to take the bunt for their team. even with the records on the line, you got a home run or a hit record on the line, but we need you to take a bunt right now, and you're willing to do it. And I think we don't do that enough. And I think that's really cool what you guys do to say, okay, no, you're the wingman this time. You have to train to be the wingman. And you're like, you could be a glory hog or whatever, but you're like, no, you got to be the wingman today. And I think that's really cool. And I was like, how do we implement that more across the force, like type of positions like that? I think that's really cool.
No, that is a really good point. Character, you mentioned character, and it's another thing that is so important to develop and mentor in our young airmen. When I say airmen, that's officer and enlisted alike. I mean, everybody needs character. And it's fundamental to making a good leader. Mm-hmm. And there may be some mistakes, and those mistakes people need to be held accountable, and they need to learn from them and need to grow. Mm-hmm. And how to do that is art and a science, right? I mean, you could read a book and you can say, hey, this is what I'm supposed to do. But then there's an art too. And that is where it goes to increasing your circle of trust and increasing your peer group till you could talk, right? And bounce ideas off each other and be like, hey, I have this crazy thing happened in my organization. And, as a squadron commander, I can't do what I do without every other squadron commander on base. And the cool thing is that the higher you get in rank, your circle of trust builds to where now I could talk to all these different squadron commanders. Mm-hmm. And so I have blind spots. I know I have blind spots. I don't know what they are necessarily, because when I find them, I try to fix them. But, it's interesting. And that's where I love just talking to the other squadron commanders and bouncing ideas off of. Mm-hmm. And, we have a WhatsApp group, and we have meetings and everything where we talk and about tough subjects. And it's just like the Chiefs group, and how important that Chiefs group is to get to know each other on a personal level. So when then times are tough, you have those relationships, and you're like, hey, this is what happened, X, Y, and Z. Any thoughts on this to bounce ideas off of? Right. So I think that's important.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to build those relationships before you need them. And I think, that a lot of times we do it the opposite way. But you bring up a good point. And as a squadron commander, you start building you have those relationships with other squadron commanders. But one thing that I've noticed, and just as my experience, because as airmen, we're already like, hey, go join the, whatever it might be called on that base, the airmen's group. At Travis, we call it Airmen Committed to Excellence. And a lot of other places we have a similar group. Some places might call it Rising 4, or, and then they have the 5-6 group, typically the NCOs, and then the senior NCOs, top 3. And we always see the CGOC. Right. So the company grade officer committee, right? So we're like, and we always, like as senior NCOs, we always assign a mentor to go there. And 9 times out of 10, I've sent somebody over there as a top 3 president. I'd send like somebody over there, and they're like, nobody showed up to the meeting, dude. And I'm like, or like there was like 3 officers, and all 3 of them were the executive committee leads. You know what I mean? And I'm like, really? Nobody showed up to the meeting?
It was the president, secretary, and treasurer.
Right. Yeah. Typically that's what happens. And I just find it like, so do you think that, that because for us, it's ingrained in us at the beginning to all the way to the end of our career that we need to be involved to have those conversations like you talked about. We're developing our peer leadership skills. Mm-hmm. Do you think, I'm really like asking out of curiosity, does that really start happening more when you're, in that squadron level or maybe flight level type of stuff? Because it doesn't seem like it's really happening at the CGOC. I'm sure there are some amazing CGOCs out there, I just, haven't really ran into those. So I was just kind of wondering.
I know. I'll be careful what I say, because I don't want to just throw CGOCs under the bus, but I could just tell you from my personal experience, mm-hmm. I was not involved with the CGOC. Now I knew a lot of other CGOs, mm-hmm. and especially at Kunsan, because it was such a small base.
Mm-hmm. And you're tight, yeah.
But I would say that when I was younger, I did not have the same experience that I have today. What I wanted to do is go home to my wife and and everything else. And I didn't while I did volunteer for outside organizations and everything, I would say that I would have benefited from the CGOC probably more so than I would have liked to think when
At that time.
Captain Kennedy
Yeah.
thought at the time, which is interesting. That is a good point. And yeah, I did not see the value of it when I was a captain. And, it was, I guess what I saw was that there wasn't a lot of other pilots in it.
Right.
And I saw it as, well, that's what they do. It's not what the pilots do. And it took me a while to figure out how much we need each other.
Right.
And the big opportunity that is presented to pilots kind of at the captain level is to be a project officer for a flying training deployment or a big exercise, something similar to that, to where they are it's where we take 12, 18 aircraft and we go someplace else. We deploy, whether it's downrange or whether it's to red flag or whether it's to one of the many exercises the DoD participates in. And it's really one of the first opportunities you get as a pilot to actually see what LRS does for you. And then you see, oh man, if I don't actually understand and help you out and understand your showstoppers and some of the things that you just can't do, like, why can't you just get me 5 C-17s and fly everything the next day? Like, I don't understand. It's the first time that you really see the benefit and the critical nature of all those organizations. I was a project officer back to back and it was just invaluable. It really was. And those kind of opportunities I cherish. And luckily for us, we're on the road a lot. So I think last year, we were on the road somewhere around 130, 140 days or so. And this year is the same. So luckily for us, there's a lot of opportunities for our guys to kind of step up and understand what it takes to employ air power.
Yeah. Some rough gigs like, Portugal, Sweden. You guys had some rough goes there. I remember I was there. I was like, okay. That's where we're going now. But that's awesome. And I think that partnership, building that partnership capacity is so important with our NATO allies and what you guys do. And it's really just being a hater. I'm just totally being a hater because I didn't get to go on any of those trips. But no, that's really cool. And I think I really appreciate your perspectives on that. I know I really appreciate your perspectives on that and the reason why I asked this, and I think it's so cool to have this conversation with you and I, because we're from very different backgrounds when it comes to on an installation. And we do things very differently. I'm in a civil engineer squadron. We have almost 500 people. And right now I have like 10, 12 CGOs. It's unheard of how many we have right now. We have 5 captains. It's like never happened. But for me as a senior enlisted leader of my squadron, I'm like literally assigning senior NCOs to these officers. They might not know it, but like, hey, you, that's yours. That lieutenant is yours, right?
You got his hand receipt.
Right. Make sure that you're growing that lieutenant, because he's going to be a squadron commander one day. And we just make sure that he's a good squadron commander and takes care of all of us. But I think, in the ops world, you may not have that same number of senior NCOs to even match up, right? It is very different. So I was always curious, like the development, and because really me looking through the perspective of taking care of people and making sure that when you're a squadron commander, you understand what you're doing when you make decisions, right?
Yes.
And how that's impacting people, and it builds your credibility. It really does if you understand that.
I agree.
Yeah. So. Very good.
I agree. I think that that bond between a senior NCO and a CGO is just invaluable. And sometimes it does get missed if there's not an opportunity to have it. But definitely as you grow up, you start seeing how important it is. And, when I was the director of operations for the Fighter Squadron, um, well, and this is funny because the rank imbalance is weird because I was a major and then a lieutenant colonel as a director of operations, and on the maintenance side it's a captain and typically a master sergeant. That's the lead production superintendent. And why there's a big rank difference, could go in there and just bark orders, and that will fail. It will fail within a week.
Yeah.
Right. You quickly learn that you have to be humble and you have to allow yourself to get mentored by somebody that knows a job a whole lot better than you.
Yeah.
And it's that ability to understand what you know and what you don't know. And I guess it kind of goes back to that vulnerability piece, is that you have to make yourself a little bit vulnerable, and you have to be like, hey, here's an idea. And then you have to be open enough, and it's this trust calculus that people go through. Mm-hmm. It's this, they have to be able to, when you walk up to somebody, and let's say I'm the lieutenant colonel, director of operations, and I'm walking into maintenance, and I have a great idea. We're going to plus up the jets, and I need 5 C-17s, and we're gonna do this big operation. And then I go in there with this great idea, and that person does a quick trust calculation in his mind and says, "Is this person going to rip my head off, right? Or can I just give him some open and honest feedback that, hey, sir, that isn't maybe the best idea, and this is why." And the cool thing I've seen people do is, yes, we can do that, but here are the risks. Yeah, hey, I can give you 18, 20 jets to fly on Monday, and you're not flying the rest of the week. So if that's really what you want, I'm totally willing to do that. But here's another option that we could possibly take, and that is just to fly the normal turn pattern. And some of the reasons why behind it. But why that's just one example, and it was talking about flying and maintenance, the ops maintenance relationship. That you have to understand, you have to be vulnerable in all kind of situations, whether, as a commander, if I'm dealing with UCMJ actions,
right.
It's nice to, and almost it has to be mandatory to talk to a chief. Right. To talk to a senior NCO and be like, well, how is this going to affect this person? Is this right balance? Talk to the judge advocate and understand what tools are available. But to go back to that point, with if I'm not open, if I don't allow myself to be vulnerable initially, then that person is never going to speak up. Right. And it's just going to lead to failure. And
yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I think there's so much, and like, that's what we were kind of talking about a moment ago. It's like, you got to start building the trust before you need it. Right. I mean, that's, and saying that you need it, I mean, like, it's not a quid pro quo type thing, right? You're building that relationship and that trust ahead of time. And yeah, so, and yes, sir, like a lot, I love hearing your perspectives on this stuff. And like I said, I really wanted to have you on because you're such an outstanding person, for one, and two, because I think you bring a perspective that our audience hasn't, been exposed to yet, at least listening to our podcast, because we've primarily had a lot of senior enlisted leaders on here and some civilian industry leaders, but from the officer perspective, and also not just any specific officer, but officer as a fighter pilot, I think you bring unique perspectives to the table, and we also discover how many commonalities we have, over, the actual differences. And I think there's a lot of value there too. So, man, we've already been on here for like over an hour.
I know. So, it felt like 15 minutes.
I know.
It was awesome talking with you.
Yeah. So we got to do a part 2, because I know we're going to talk about some other like fitness and stuff, and we'll do a bro episode on intermittent fasting and some of the other stuff that we've both been experimenting on next time. But I think that'll be a fun one as well.
That'd be awesome.
Yes,
I did just want to, as we're circling back up, I just didn't. I wanted to kind of leave you with this, and I just wanted to tell you how impressed I am with you. You're always looking to make yourself better, and you're always looking to make your airmen better. That is something that stood out to me from day one that I met you. And it was never about you. It was about your airmen. It was about the team. It was about the mission. And I wanted to thank you for that. You motivate people in ways that you probably never know. But I remember the first time I met you, I was motivated by you, and I was inspired to be a better person because of it. And I'm just so happy that we got to build a professional relationship and keep talking with each other because you make a difference. So keep doing that. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. That really means a lot. It really means a lot. And and I got that same vibe from you. So, and that's the big thing is I'm so grateful to be connected with you. And that's why I reached out and thought this would be a great conversation. It's even better than I even thought it would be. So what we do at the Llama Lounge before we finally wrap up any of these discussions, and we do this thing called a leadership rapid fire. So
cool.
We're just going to ask you a series of 4 questions before we call it. And it's just 4 questions and how you interpret them is how you answer them. There's not a right way to interpret them either, but cool. So question number 1, what is your favorite leadership trait?
Trust.
Awesome. All right. Question number 2, what is your favorite quote? Success is never final. Failure is never fatal. Nice. Awesome. I love that one. All right. What are some books that you would recommend to aspiring leaders?
Yeah, that's a good one. Ego is the Enemy. I like that one. I do find that ego gets in the way of people's decisions and their actions more than they'll ever be aware of. It's that unconscious bias, and it was supposed to be rapid fire, so I'll make my answers rapid. So ego is the enemy. The other ones are Turn the Ship Around is a great one. It has a leader model and pushing decisions down to the lowest level, and Extreme Ownership by Jocko. So, extreme ownership. If you have a task, no matter if you wanted that task or not, or whether or not you think that task is beneath you, you're going to be the best at it. And you are going to own it from start to finish and keep everybody informed. I think that's awesome. Awesome. All right. The final question. This is it comes from our motto at the Llama Lounge, which is life, learning, and leadership. So the question is, how do you find harmony between life, learning, and leadership? Oh, that is a good one. How do you find harmony between it? Well, I think the crux of that has to do with purpose and having a purpose to go to work every day, to find a purpose in being a better husband, to be a better father, and having that purpose and be able to easily define why I do what I do. I think that is where the harmony comes into play. That's awesome. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate it. And really appreciate your time once again. I really mean it. That we definitely got to run this one back again and have another conversation. It was great. Yeah, would love to, Chief. Anytime. You let me know. All right. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in again. And, as always, be safe, stay healthy, and llamas are out. Awesome. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in to the Llama Lounge podcast. Be sure to visit the homepage for links to products and services related to this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. See you next time.